A week after my wedding, my wife's parents took me to a family dinner. They mocked my job, my accent, and even my clothes. I asked my wife, "Is this how it's going to be?" She whispered, "Just ignore them." An hour later, I got up, made a toast, and said something that silenced the whole table. It still felt surreal saying wife instead of girlfriend or fiancé. We hadn't even unpacked all the wedding gifts. We were still figuring out how to split closet space, still finding confetti in shoes and coat pockets from our reception. And now here I was, sitting at a long, polished mahogany table in her parents' mansion in Westport, Connecticut, wondering if this was my new reality. I'll rewind a bit. I'm Brendan. I own an HVAC business in Atlanta. Started it myself after years of working for other companies, doing the grunt work, taking weekend calls, slowly saving enough to branch out. I'm not a millionaire, but I'm stable. I'm proud of what I've built. Mariel's from a different world. She grew up in Connecticut, attended a boarding school where they learned French and equestrian, then went on to Harvard and landed a job in marketing at a major firm. She's smart, confident, and genuinely kind, which is part of what drew me to her. She never acted like she was above me, not even once. When we met at a barbecue hosted by one of her college friends who had moved down south, we just clicked. We dated for 2 years. 2 good years. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but we learned how to work through things. Or so I thought. Mariel always seemed slightly uncomfortable when I mentioned going up to Connecticut. She'd say things like, "We'll go soon," or "Maybe just us next time," whenever the topic of visiting her parents came up. I figured it was the usual awkward family dynamics that everyone has. Maybe her folks were stiff. Maybe they weren't big on company. She never said they were classist jerks. After the wedding, they invited us up for what Mariel called a welcome dinner. Her parents wanted to host us, to properly celebrate our marriage. She smiled when she said it, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, I agreed. I wanted to make a good impression. I didn't need them to love me, just respect that I loved their daughter and she loved me back. We flew up the following weekend. The house looked like something out of a magazine. High stone walls, those perfectly symmetrical windows, a front lawn manicured to the millimeter. Even the air smelled expensive. Inside, everything gleamed. There was art everywhere, the kind I don't understand, like 3 red dots on a canvas for $30,000. Mariel's dad, Roy, greeted me with a handshake that didn't hide the way he looked me up and down. Her mom, Celeste, gave a tight-lipped smile, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Her younger brother, Spencer, barely said hello before walking off, and her older sister, Anika, was on her phone, fingers moving fast and eyes never meeting mine. I told myself not to judge too fast. Maybe they were just reserved. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. But dinner told me otherwise. The first shot came early. Roy asked about my work. "I own a heating and air company," I said. "Mostly residential systems. Some commercial contracts." "Oh," he replied, sipping from his crystal wine glass. "So, tradesman." "Yes, sir. That's admirable. I always respected people who could work with their hands. Not everyone can succeed in college." He said it casually, like he was paying a compliment. But he wasn't. Then Celeste chimed in. When Mariel was little, she always said she'd marry someone who wore suits and worked in the city. "This is a surprise." I smiled tightly and tried to eat. Spencer leaned back in his chair and said, "Honestly, man, I think it's kind of cool. You're like, what? The guy who comes fix the AC when it breaks in July. That's gotta be fun." More laughter. I glanced at Mariel. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't saying anything either. Just sat there, politely sipping her wine, looking down at her plate. I whispered, "Is this how it's going to be?" She whispered back, "Just ignore them." I didn't say anything after that. I nodded and kept eating, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just awkward. This was a glimpse into a family that saw me as some sort of novelty, maybe even a mistake. Something Mariel would eventually regret, in their eyes. I kept thinking, this can't be what marriage looks like from now on. I didn't sign up for this. I stayed quiet for a while. I listened to them talk about renovations to their beach house, a ski trip they had just taken, a charity gala Celeste was helping organize. Mariel tried to include me, once or twice, but it felt forced, like she was slipping a hand to a drowning man. Then Roy raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to learning to appreciate life from different perspectives." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, but I didn't drink. Instead, I stood up. "Mind if I say something?" I asked. The table fell quiet. Roy smirked again, expecting me to give some kind of thank you for having me toast. But I wasn't in the mood for that. And that's where things took a turn. Roy leaned back like he was settling in for a show. Celeste blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. Spencer looked mildly amused. Anika was finally off her phone, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Mariel's eyes were wide, but she didn't stop me. She didn't say a word. I held my glass loosely and looked down at it for a second, mostly to collect my thoughts. My voice, when I spoke, wasn't angry, just clear. "I appreciate you having me here tonight," I said. It's not every day I get to sit in a dining room this nice, with wine this expensive, surrounded by people who clearly don't think I belong. A silence fell again. Not the awkward kind, the sharp kind, the kind that slices. I know I don't fit your mold, I continued. I didn't go to Ivy League schools. I don't wear tailored suits or summer in the Hamptons. I don't play tennis or quote foreign policy during dinner. What I do is fix things. Air conditioners, heating systems, ductwork. I run a small business, I employ people, and I work 6 days a week because I believe in showing up and doing something useful. I looked directly at Roy. I didn't marry Mariel to level up. I married her because she's smart, thoughtful, and has a sense of humor that makes me feel like the world isn't such a hard place. And if you can't see that I'm here because I love her, not because I want something from you, then that's not on me. Roy's face had gone stony. Celeste didn't move. Anika had gone back to her phone. Spencer had stopped smirking. But what really gets me, I added, is not that you mocked me. It's that Mariel knew you would. And she told me to ignore it, to sit through it. Now I turned to my wife. Her face had changed. Her lips were pressed tight, like she was holding back something. Words, tears, maybe both. I get that families can be difficult. And I didn't expect a warm welcome. But I did expect you to have my back. No one said anything. I placed the glass gently on the table. Not slammed, not thrown. Just set it down with finality. Excuse me, I said, and walked out of the room. I didn't storm. I didn't slam the door. I walked. Calmly, quietly, out through the marble foyer, past the cold sculptures and tall vases of carefully curated flowers. I stepped outside, into the chilled air of Connecticut in early spring, where the sky still held a shade of blue and the air smelled like sea salt and pine. I didn't leave. I just stood there, hands in my coat pockets, trying to steady the spinning in my chest. I didn't know what she'd do. Follow me. Stay in there and smooth things over? Apologize? Defend me? Nothing at all. 10 minutes passed. 15. I was just about to head back in, not to rejoin them, but to tell her I was going to wait in the car when the front door opened. Mariel stepped out, arms wrapped around herself, not from the cold, but like she needed to hold herself together. She looked at me, didn't say anything right away. Then, you really said all that. I did. She looked down, kicked a pebble with her shoe. I should have said something too. I froze. I wasn't expecting a fight. Just something. I know. She looked up at me again. I didn't know it would be this bad. Or maybe I did and didn't want to believe it. I didn't speak. I wanted to give her the space to say what she needed to. They've always been like this, she said. Not just to you. To anyone who doesn't check their boxes. They act polite, but it's a different kind of cruelty. It's slow. It smirks. It's under the breath. But they taught me to smile through it and not make waves. That's what they value, composure. Appearances. You told me to ignore them. I know. And that was wrong. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. You need to decide what kind of life you want. What kind of marriage? I know. Another pause. I married you because you're real, she said quietly. Because you don't play games. And tonight, you were more honest than I've ever been in that house in my entire life. We stood there for a while longer. No yelling. No drama. Just the air between us, full of things we were finally saying out loud. Eventually, she said, let's go. I don't want to stay here tonight. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. We got in the rental car and drove to a nearby hotel. She booked it. I didn't ask questions. We slept in silence, but not the kind that means anger. The kind that means sorting, processing. In the morning, she turned to me in bed and asked, are we going to be okay? I didn't answer right away. I didn't answer her right away because something about the question felt too small for what we were going through. Are we going to be okay? Wasn't just about the fight at dinner. It was about the future, about what kind of people we were, and whether we were going to be able to stand together when things got uncomfortable. After a few seconds, I said the only honest thing I could. That depends on whether we face things together or alone. Mariel just nodded. No protest, no excuses. Just understanding. That meant something. We spent most of the morning in quiet. She ordered coffee from the lobby, and we sat across from each other at the tiny hotel table. She stared out the window a lot. I could tell she was deep in thought, probably revisiting every conversation, every moment she'd let her parents' comments slide in the past. Not just about me, but about anyone who didn't fit their curated mold. Eventually, she said, they're going to call. I didn't answer. And they're going to say you were disrespectful, that you embarrassed them in their home. I just sipped my coffee. She kept going, voice calm but serious. And I'm going to tell them, they embarrassed me. For years. That was the first time I saw something shift in her. Like she was standing up straighter. Not physically, but emotionally. She looked less like someone trying to apologize for the night before, and more like someone finally seeing clearly. We drove back to the airport later that day. The silence in the car wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. Somewhere over Virginia, flying back to Atlanta, she reached over and took my hand. No words. Just held it. And that, more than anything, made me believe there was still something here worth fighting for. But once we got home, the ripple effect began. The first call came the day after we landed. I was out back cleaning the grill when Mariel came out with her phone still in her hand. Her face said everything before she even opened her mouth. Roy, she said. He wants to talk to you. I wiped my hands on a towel. And what do you want? She paused. I want to know how you want to handle it. I won't hand you the phone if you don't want to take it. That mattered. I nodded. Put it on speaker. I want to hear what he says to you. She put the phone on the patio table and tapped speaker. Mariel. Roy's voice came through, sharp and clipped. I hope you've had time to reflect on what happened at dinner. That display was deeply inappropriate. She didn't respond. I understand he's your husband now, and there's nothing we can do about that. But if he expects to be part of this family, he needs to learn how to behave. We were nothing but welcoming. That was enough. I leaned down and spoke clearly. Roy, you invited me to your home and spent an entire evening mocking who I am, what I do, and where I come from. That's not welcoming. That's elitist oppressing, and I won't be part of it. There was a beat of silence. Then Roy said, if you think acting like a victim is going to earn my respect, you're mistaken. You embarrass my wife. You embarrass my family. Mariel cut in, her voice sharp for the first time. No, Dad. You embarrassed me. And you've been doing it my whole life. You just usually get away with it because people are too afraid to say anything. Another silence. Roy scoffed. Well, I see how it is. And then the line went dead. Mariel sat back, slowly. She didn't say anything right away. She just stared at the screen, her thumb hovering like she wanted to call him back and undo it all, out of habit more than desire. But she didn't. That night, we sat down and really talked. Like, really talked. For the first time since getting married. We had the kind of conversation people should probably have before the wedding. The kind about values, family, boundaries, and what happens when your bloodline refuses to respect your partner. Mariel admitted she had always carried guilt around disappointing her parents. That guilt had driven a lot of her choices, her college major, her job, even the kind of men she dated before me. They expected perfection, she said, and I got really good at pretending to be their version of it. I told her, you don't have to pretend with me. She nodded, and for a second, her eyes glistened. The following week, she blocked her mom and dad's numbers. Not forever, she said, but until they could talk like people and not monarchs expecting loyalty. She talked to her therapist about boundaries. She even canceled a trip she had planned with her mom out of obligation. The change wasn't overnight. We still had hard conversations. There were days when she was withdrawn, clearly mourning the illusion of a normal relationship with her family. But she showed up, every day, trying. And I did too. Then, something unexpected happened. Spencer, her brother, reached out. It started with a text to Mariel. Hey, can I talk to you about that dinner? At first, she didn't reply. She showed it to me, unsure. Eventually, she sent back, if you want to have a real conversation, not just defend mom and dad, I'll listen. He called the next night. She took it in the kitchen. I stayed out back, not wanting to hover. After about half an hour, she came out, sat next to me on the porch steps, and said, you're not going to believe this. He actually apologized. Said he was embarrassed too. Said he grew up thinking that kind of talk was normal. That surprised me. Honestly, I'd written Spencer off after the dinner. He said, watching you speak up made him realize he'd never stood up to them in his whole life. I didn't know what to say. She continued, he wants to meet for coffee. Just him. No parents. A few days later, Mariel met Spencer at a coffee shop in Midtown. I didn't go, that was her choice. I trusted her judgment. When she got home that evening, she looked lighter somehow. Not cheerful, but clearer. She told me he'd been surprisingly honest. He said he used to think our parents were just proud. Now he sees it was about control, about image, that it wasn't just you they were mocking. It's been everyone, for years. Even him. Apparently, Spencer admitted that he'd always gone along with it because it was easier. That laughing at their jokes meant staying in the will, staying in favor. But when he saw me, someone who had no reason to play along, no need for their approval, stand up and speak the truth, it hit him. He said it felt like watching someone snap a string that had been choking all of us. I was stunned. I don't think I ever expected him to reflect like that, let alone own it. Mariel said he apologized, not just for dinner, but for not saying something then and there, for staying quiet, for not calling it out. That felt like a turning point. Maybe not a dramatic reconciliation or some storybook moment, but it was something real. But not everyone was interested in reconciliation. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. A physical letter addressed to Mariel in her mother's handwriting. It was stiff, overly formal, and made it about our side of the story, which basically meant a laundry list of reasons they felt they were owed an apology. Mariel read it once, sighed, and folded it back into the envelope. What are you going to do? I asked. I think I've done enough for now, she said, and tucked it away in the drawer by the sink. She never responded. That month was the hardest part. Not because of the dinner, not even because of the letter, but because of what it stirred up. The cracks we hadn't addressed before the wedding were suddenly front and center. What we each expected from family, how we responded to conflict, what it meant to be on the same team, we had to figure all of that out in real time. There were nights we didn't talk much. Not out of anger, but from emotional exhaustion. Times she'd curl up on the couch and just stare at the ceiling. I'd bring her tea, rub her back, sit with her. We didn't need to fill every silence. Then, slowly, things started to shift. She began setting new boundaries in other areas too, at work, with friends, even in how she talked to herself. I watched her unlearn years of needing to be agreeable, of performing polish over honesty. And she started showing up differently in our marriage. She'd say things like, "You were right to call that out," or "Thank you for not letting me hide." Not every day, not all at once, but enough to know she wasn't just moving past what happened. She was growing through it. I started showing up differently too. I realized I'd been assuming that she saw things like I did, black and white, right and wrong. But she had lived her whole life in the gray. I started listening more, asking questions before reacting. I stopped expecting her to fight the same way I would, and instead focused on whether we were moving in the same direction. One night, sitting out on the patio with a beer in my hand and her head resting on my shoulder, I said, "You know, if someone had told me the hardest part of our first month of marriage would be your parents, I'd have believed them. But I wouldn't have guessed we'd come out of it stronger." She looked up at me, sleepy-eyed, and said, "I didn't think we would, either." There wasn't anything romantic about what happened at that dinner, but there was something honest. Raw. It stripped everything down. And the truth is, I'm glad it happened. Because now I know who my wife is, really is, when it matters. And I think she finally knows who she is too. Mariel changed in the months that followed. Not in some movie-style makeover sense, but in the quiet, internal way people do when they stop trying to live for someone else's approval. She laughed more freely. She questioned things out loud. She became, slowly but surely, someone who wasn't afraid to take up space in her own life. And as for me, I stayed steady. I kept my business running. I kept showing up for her. I let her process things at her pace. But in the background, her parents didn't let up. They didn't speak to her directly again, not for nearly 6 months. But they kept their distance in the most passive-aggressive ways possible. No birthday call. No message on our anniversary. They sent a single white card when her great-aunt died, addressed only to Mrs. Mariel Dalton, as if she'd married herself. No mention of me. Then came the Christmas invitation. It was forwarded to her email by Celeste. Simple, cold, and formal. An invitation to a family holiday gathering at the house. Dress code listed. Arrival time sharp. No note. No warmth. Is this their idea of peace? I asked when she showed it to me. No, Mariel said. It's their way of pretending nothing ever happened. I nodded. You want to go? She hesitated. I want them to see who I've become, who we are, but I'm not going to let them pretend anymore. We are SVP'd, yes. I wasn't sure what to expect. I figured they'd either pretend like nothing had happened or find some new, veiled way to throw jabs. I braced myself. But what I didn't expect, what made the whole night worthwhile, was Mariel's plan. We arrived at the house dressed sharp but understated. I wore a navy sport coat over a dark turtleneck and slacks. Mariel wore a deep green dress and no jewelry. Not the necklace Celeste had passed down, not the pearls from their family collection. Just herself. Simple. Confident. We walked in, and sure enough, the room went still for a beat. The cousins, aunts, distant relatives, they all turned. Celeste smiled that tight little smile. Roy nodded once, almost imperceptibly. We were ushered into the main room, where champagne and hors d'oeuvres circled on trays. Then came the first dig, soft, but calculated. "Oh," Celeste said as we entered. "Brendan, you clean up well. I wasn't sure how you'd handle a black tie setting." I smiled. "I managed just fine. It's still easier than crawling under a house in August to fix a collapsed air duct." She blinked, and the room shifted. A few cousins snickered, unsure whose side to be on. But the real moment came when Roy clinked a glass to make a toast. "We're happy to have everyone here tonight," he began. "Family is about tradition and togetherness. It's about maintaining standards and history." Mariel stepped forward before he could finish. "Actually, Dad, do you mind if I say something?" There was a beat. Roy froze. He hadn't prepared for that. She turned toward the room. "I just want to thank everyone for being here. It's been a strange year. One of growth, change, and waking up to who we really are. Some of us realize that tradition isn't always the same as respect, and that being part of a family means accepting people for who they are, not who you wish they were." You could feel the tension ripple across the room. Roy tried to cut in. "Mariel, this isn't really," she held up a hand. "You had your toast. This is mine." She turned slightly and gestured to me. "This man," she said, "stood up for me when I wasn't strong enough to stand up for myself. He faced all of you with honesty and dignity when you gave him nothing but condescension. And I just want to say, if that made anyone here uncomfortable, maybe you should sit with that." Dead silence. No one touched their champagne. Then, calmly, she finished her glass, set it down, and smiled. "Well, I hope dinner's warm." And just like that, we turned. Together. We didn't storm out. We didn't slam doors. We We just walked out of that marble hallway, down the stone steps, into the frosty night, arm in arm. In the car, I asked her, "You feel better?" She exhaled. "I feel free." The fallout was quieter than I expected. There were emails. Some long, some angry. One from Celeste, saying we'd embarrassed the family. One from Roy, claiming we'd burned bridges. But Mariel never replied. Instead, we built our own traditions. The following Christmas, we hosted our own dinner. Friends. Found family. Spencer came. Actually, brought his boyfriend, which caused another small wrongdoing back in Connecticut. He toasted us, his hands shaking slightly, and said, "To real families, the kind that choose each other and choose respect." That toast, in our small Atlanta dining room, felt more meaningful than anything ever said in that giant, cold Westport mansion. And that was the real revenge. Not yelling, not cruelty, not retaliation. It was living well. It was thriving. It was showing them that they didn't break us. They didn't bend us. We bent away from them, toward a life that was finally ours. Update: I still run my HVAC business. We're expanding next year, adding solar and smart systems. Mariel left her firm and started consulting on her own terms. She chooses her clients now. We're expecting our first kid in the spring. We haven't spoken to Roy or Celeste, and we're okay with that. Sometimes, the best revenge is just peace.